The first book of Dove. Wait, before we go out there. Zeke paused, looking at his son one last time before setting off on an endeavor that he was literally bred and born for. Generations of prophecy and planning leading to this moment, this event. I just wanted to say, frozen, collecting his thoughts, searching for the right words, holding out for divine inspiration. It's okay, Father. His son, no longer a boy, on the precipice of becoming a man, interjected, seeing a rare moment of unbridled emotion on his father's face, hoping to prevent whatever he was about to expound upon. I know how proud of me you are. And yes, I know just what an honor it is to be God's chosen one, his dove. You truly are God's chosen one. Ever amazed at how true that statement had become. Clear now his son was as ready as he would ever be. And with that, Zeke opened the door. The entirety of the community was collected together in the small chamber, referred to as the foyer. It was an area rarely used this past 100 years, and never more than just a single soul, spot-checking the integrity of the airlock, ensuring that seal holds firm till this coming moment. Genesis 8:8-12, Zeke boomed, announcing to the entirety of their community that the century event had begun. All eyes entrenched on him. Noah sent out a dove initially, pausing to look at his son, mentally holding on to him for just a moment longer. But it returned because the waters still covered the earth. He wasn't a natural preacher like his brother Noah. Zeke wasn't supposed to be giving this speech, wasn't supposed to be his son. But who was he to argue with God's will? Reminding himself that God chose him, his son, his family. Zeke found the words, doing his best impression of his older brother. After waiting 7 more days, he released the dove again, and it returned with a fresh olive leaf, indicating the water was receding. Now he was feeling it, finding his groove. This pause was more to relish in God's word flowing through him dramatically, to let his flock take some joy in what he was saying, what they and the generations before them had all been working so long for. Finally, he sent the dove out again, and it did not return, signaling the earth was dry enough to support life. And with that, the small sealed exit into the airlock hissed into life, open. The entire community taking a moment to get just a glimpse of the door on the other side, the thin piece of sheet metal separating them from whatever was left beyond it. Dove stepped into the airlock, the first door and all that he ever known, sealed shut behind him. Frozen in time between 2 worlds. Limbo. The outer door of the airlock as well had not been opened in 100 years, not since the stroke of midnight on December 31st, 1999, when it was sealed shut for a final time. Now, on the dawn of the new century, Dove stood frozen, waiting for the mechanical lock to release, the outer seal hissing as the inner one had done before. With it he felt the rush of fresh air hit his skin. The first air from outside the ark to ever enter his or any of the other colonists' lungs in their lifetimes. Air seems clean, he thought to himself as he moved towards the small hidden exit just up ahead. It was midnight and dark. The air was crisp, cold but dry, noticeably less humid than inside the ark. It was quiet, but there were indications of life. Chirps of an anonymous insect, the squawking of a lone bird. Nothing he recognized, but still some indication of life. He didn't see any lights or obvious signs of humanity, but that could have just been due to their intentionally remote location. He fished out his binoculars as he finished exiting the compound and cresting a large ridge overlooking the valley. Still no obvious signs of humanity in the valley below, shrouded in the pitch black just after the stroke of midnight. True and utter darkness, hiding him under the thick canopy of treetops. He couldn't see his hand in front of his face before clicking on the small torch he was given. There wasn't any path or clear sign of where to go, but that was by design. No reason for anyone to ever come up here, they had no desire to be found. He grabbed his small map and compass, took a moment to gather his bearings, and headed out to see if indeed the waters had subsided. The air was much colder than he expected, or thought even possible. He had only known of cold from how others described it. Writers who typically were writing for an audience that had at least some experience with the frigid, but for Dove, someone that never knew anything, below 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Those words didn't do it justice. The way the crisp air seemed to burn his lungs and face. Everything stung, like needles piercing anything not shrouded under layer upon layer. In many places, the cold even eluded the thick wool, burrowing, finding his unprepared skin. I had no idea the cold would burn worse than any fire. He thought to himself, letting go of his preconceived notions about the winter wind. All those hours reading countless pieces of both fiction and non-fiction, hoping to prepare himself for the outside world, what winter would feel like, where no match for the real thing. If he was wrong about something as simple as how cold air would feel, how could any of his other preconceived notions possibly hold up? The scout forced to leave them behind with the rest of his youth inside the ark. Humbled, he let his training overtake him. Glad Triss put so many layers on me before I left, he thought to himself. His uncle often chastised him as a child, studying, preparing, telling him not to assume anything, that he had no idea just what this world the Lord had created would throw at him, what it would be like outside the ark, repeatedly being told he was a child who knew nothing. No book, no word of man couldn't adequately describe God's creations. The biting breeze relaying just how true that was. Feeling indignation at his elders with no more experience of the outside world than he. Now, as that cold breeze slapped him in the face once more, jerking him back to reality, to this moment, he saw how little he truly knew. This acceptance of ignorance just cleared the way for all his training to kick in. "You've got a bounce to your step today," his teacher remarked as his young pupil entered the archive. "Today's the day we finally decide on the path I will take with my maiden flight." The optimistic adolescent Dove chirped up, attempting to contain his excitement, jubilation betrayed by the visible bounce in his step. "Correct," Triss injected, peeking her head from behind a towering stack of books. "Yes, but with a slight twist." Her brother quickly seizing focus back from his younger sister. Just like Triss to steal Proctor's thunder, claim his brilliant idea as her own. Not today. Not with something so large as this. "So what's the twist?" Dove nearly leaping out of his shoes with anticipation. "I want you to tell me—" "Us," Triss again interrupting so artfully to remind her brother. "Yes, us. What you would do, what route you would undertake, and most importantly, why." Proctor putting heavy emphasis on the pronouns. "First, I'd exit the airlock, climb the ridge across the meadow outside the entrance, and then through the tree line." Dove started, clearly having gone through this countless times in his head, his mind racing so much that it spilled over into his feet, creating a nervous pace throughout the cramped space. Lost in thought, wanting to impress them both, Dove tucking around a stack of books before returning to the table with a large map. "Why's that?" Proctor cut in, reminding Dove of the importance of the whys. "There is a stream that carves through the forest, born from the runoff of melted snow atop our home." Dove started pointing to the features on the map he had just procured before trailing off into a daydream, his kinetic energy converted into imagination, picturing what that snow-topped peak above them actually looked like. He had seen thousands of photos in the archives, a litany of snow-capped peaks, but wondered what this specific peak looked like, how endlessly deep the snow. "And what is the benefit of finding this stream?" Proctor once again reeled his young student in, back to the task at hand. "All living creatures need water to survive. Finding the stream, I can see if there is any other life. To assess the impact of the flood. If there is life and they are all drinking from the stream, it's safe to assume the water is good to drink if needed." Beaming, looking to both his instructors for praise from a correct assumption, safe assumption, but never assume anything. Noah corrected with authority, stamping his cane hard on the solid rock floor with each word, the taps echoing off the smooth tube interior of the room, punctuating his point. "Yes, uncle," Dove's youth most evident when confronted with him, always the scared little bird in his presence, only peeping up again after his uncle mimed, "Get on with your route." Having found the river, I could follow it, knowing people need water, and I should eventually come across some sign of civilization, either present or past. Some clue to point me in the next direction. The teen concluded confidently, again reminded that he was the one God chose for this. Dove had to have some of God's light, his strength inside of himself. Awoken from his stroll down memory lane, he once again checked both map and compass before continuing on with his journey, quickly coming across the stream marked on the ancient map. It was larger than he expected. Triss had explained how it would only be a trickle since it is fed from melting snow atop the peak containing their community. This being the dead of winter, almost all the water should be locked up in snow, thousands of feet up the mountain's face. This was no trickle. He could feel the moisture in the air being kicked up as the water tumbled downhill, bouncing over rocks. He took a moment to touch it, to grab a small smooth stone from inside the stream. Millions of years of rushing water, smoothing off the sharp edges, polishing the stone, seemed to sum all of this up to him. Triss will get a kick out of this little beauty, he told the darkness as he made room for the small rock in one of his countless pockets of his inner vest. If pressed, he would say he brought it back for scientific reasons, but in all reality, it's etched deep in our caveman brain to bring back a shiny rock for a potential mate. He stood frozen, hypnotized by the sound of the babbling brook, swearing it was God's voice, listening for a message in its gurgles and pops. All his studying about the landscapes he would encounter didn't prepare him for something like the soothing sound of rushing water. How many of his predecessors took that poetic chaos for granted, let it just be part of the background noise in their lives, never appreciating God's presence in their day-to-day, his voice, his beauty. Dove was starting to see just why a second flood was necessary. The once overstimulated teen had been following the stream all evening and into the following day, even though the thick canopy prevented him from actually seeing the sun. The ache in his muscles served for marking the passing of time and distance. He could feel the adrenaline and anticipation that fueled the last few hours of his trek starting to take its toll. Exhaustion hit him like a slap in the face, as if the mere thought of resting caused it. Now it was no longer his idea to call it a day, but a command from his spent body. He found a safe spot in a small clearing just off from the stream. He grabbed a handful of leaves to serve as a makeshift pillow, curled up tightly to conserve body heat, and fell asleep almost instantly. He woke to a symphony of bird songs and squawks, a mosaic of individuals calling, communicating but only their vocals, no actual birds in his sight. A rustle of leaves off in the distance, a harsh return to reality, breaking the hypnotic hold the birds' calls had on him. He turned abruptly, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was in the brush. It didn't sound large enough to be a real threat, but alone in the dark forest, anything could be a threat. He needed to remind himself of that. For the first time he could see why his uncle was so hard on him, always trying to keep him from making assumptions. Assuming it's not a threat in the underbrush, well, that very well could be his fatal mistake. A mistake that would not only jeopardize Dove's existence, but also that of his comrades back at the Ark. If he was to fail, to perish, there was a very real chance it would be the end of all God's children. After taking a few extra moments to confirm there was nothing lurking in the brush, looking to have him as breakfast, he decided to indulge in a bite as well. He would need his strength if he was going to make the clearing while it was still daylight. He double-checked his map and finished his homemade energy bar that Triss made special just for this journey. With each bite he could almost taste the caring and concern for him that Triss baked into it. A cursory glance of the map and seeing the terrain a bit better in the dim morning light splintering through the branches, Dove had a pretty good idea where he was, and confident he could make the clearing during daylight hours, possibly in as few as 6. A mix of the protein bar and his newfound optimism about the distance he has already traveled, quickly repacked the map, compass and torch in his satchel, refilled his canteen, and continued on his journey. The dim sunlight started to grow brighter as he progressed. Yes, the rising of the sun higher in the sky definitely helped, but it was more the slight thinning of the treetops that exposed him to more and more of the eerie glow. Before long, he could actually see small patches of sunlight breaking through the trees. Raphael failed to capture the glory of that ray blazing from heavens above. He paused briefly to admire the ray of light, but knew just how close he was, and vastly stepped up his pace, almost running as if he no longer controlled his legs, but God was pulling him toward his light. And then it hit him, almost stopping him dead in his tracks, sunlight hitting his skin, flush on his face. It's not like he grew up in darkness. Both the arboretum and the fields were bathed in the exact same UV rays 24 hours a day back in the Ark. the artificial sunlight used to grow the trees, producing the air they breathed and the food they all needed to survive. But this was different. That light was man-made, the product of artificially stimulating the electrons in a noble gas. This was the light of God. This was born in the heart of a star, their sun. The only light that could truly be called sunlight. This was a light born of the most violent collision in all the universe. Enough force to fuse two atoms to make a new one. This was light that took millions of years to find its way out of the sun's core before making the 8-minute journey to his face. It might be the exact same wavelength of what illuminated all he saw his entire life, but clearly wasn't the same. This was primal, born from an explosion only God could create, and that made all the difference. He let the sunlight wash over him, bathing his starving skin before approaching the ridge. Below him, the stream dropped about 3 meters to the pool below. If you were making a tourist ad, this would be the money shot. Although he had never actually been here, Dove knew this spot well. He studied it all his life. This was most likely the only spot on Earth that he had actually seen and read about before coming upon it. National Geographic did a nice piece on it in one of their countless magazines contained in the archive. Dove spent almost all his free time in the National Geographic section of the archive. He couldn't get enough of them. He loved them all. The photos, the articles, the tales of both man and nature intertwined, but seeing your home enshrined, well, of course, that issue was his favorite. Triss would always try to get him to round out his knowledge base, giving him fiction from the Bronte sisters or think pieces from George Orwell, but he would always end up with that March Nat Geo edition, staring at the foliage and fauna just outside their walls. Lost in the moment, the sun on his skin, the crisp mist splashing up from the falling water, encased in a trance, swallowed up in the beauty of it all, only to be snapped back to reality once again by his lizard brain. Something entered his peripheral, something large moving towards the water's edge. He quickly regained his focus, training his eyes on the majestic beast about 30 meters away. It was a deer, the first actual life he had seen yet. He could hear life from the moment he exited the ark, but this was his first actual glimpse. He made sure to get a quick photo, needing some physical evidence of life, just in case he scared her away while making his descent down the cliff face. The doe lifted her head once or twice when Dove would dislodge a stray rock during his descent, but each time she would continue drinking after a short pause, confirming that she didn't see Dove as a threat. He was able to get quite close, maybe 3 meters before the doe turned and faced him. From his years studying, he could see she was a doe, most likely around 3 years old, but something was odd. Thanks to the glossy photos and expert camera work, he had a very real image of what the indigenous deer of this area looked like. From a distance, that doe looked just like the ones from the century-old photos, but now up close he could see something was off. Her eyes were noticeably bigger, while her snout was shorter, almost snubbed. She looked like a Disney version of the local population, or that was the best way he could describe it. He took another, more detailed photo so he could show both Triss and Proctor when he returned to the archive. As much as he was reveling in the splendor of this picturesque cove, he reminded himself of the task at hand. Checking his watch, a few hours of daylight left. If he kept a decent pace, he could be on the outer limits of what was once inhabited territory when the last maps were entombed a century ago. As much as he would have loved another night gazing at the stars, he figured it best to focus solely on completing the task at hand. Continuing on, it was not long after when Dove heard what at first he thought was another rushing river, getting louder and louder as he approached the edge of the forest. As the trees receded and more open air exposed, he could clearly and now correctly identify the sound as traffic. He didn't need the map to know what was just ahead of him, and it sounded alive. Cresting the hill and at the exit of the dense forest stood a large road, dotted with handfuls of traffic flowing in both directions. The freeway was a landmark that Proctor knew would be Dove's best chance to determine if the waters had receded. Once he distinguished that it wasn't flowing water, but instead flowing traffic, he was overcome with an urge to finally see for himself. The cars glistened in the early day sunlight. The style sleeker, much more rounded, almost egg-shaped, more than any of the models he had seen photos of. Some had completely blacked out windows, while others were nearly transparent, exposing its passengers for all to see. That was his undeniable proof. He made sure to get a few photos, showing the tide was still too high to venture forward. Nothing left to do but head back and trigger the Omega Protocol.
Thank you for joining us as we deliver the first of many transmissions from Ezra.
Yes, brother. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to this most important tale.
Seeing as Ezra and all of the inhabitants of the Ark have been isolated from the world for a century, it is understandable that he might have made some assumptions that our listeners might have missed. Would you be so kind as to help fill in our listeners?
Like I would turn down any opportunity to expound on the details. We start today's episode as Zeke and Dove prepare for his maiden voyage. Zeke, Dove's father, is a son of Birk, and his son, Dove, is a direct son of Birk, the one all the prophecy and preparation has prepared us for this task, this journey before him.
You mentioned the terms son of Birk and direct son of Birk. Would you mind explaining the difference to our listeners?
There were originally 8 founders, the original inhabitants of the Ark, when the airlock was sealed back on December 31st, 1999, Birk being both prophet and founder. Any son born to one of those founding fathers, in this case Birk, would be a son of Birk, the firstborn son getting the honor of being a direct son of Birk, whereas anyone not blessed with being born a male or to a male descendant would simply be a child of Birk.
To use a tangible example, my father and his father before him were both the firstborn sons of Evan, the original archivist, making me and both of those men direct sons of Evan. Where you are a female, and Ezra, a son of one of Evan's daughters, making you both children of Evan. The main distinction being Ezra, as a child of Evan, will never be a true archivist, needing to be at least a son of Evan, if not a direct son of Evan, to be bestowed with that honor.
Thank you for so kindly reminding me of my place, that my title of archivist will always just be a ceremonial one.
Now, Triss, you know that wasn't what I was saying. I was just trying to illustrate how this works to our listeners.
Sure, back to the prophecy portion. Birk was given a glimpse of the coming flood and was using the Genesis passage as his roadmap. Like the chapter states, a dove is released to check if the flood is ended. Zeke and Dove were preparing Dove for just that. Once the dove is released from the Ark, he flashes back to a time preparing for this mission, back in the archive.
Ah, yes, and this is where you and I both make a brief appearance about a year back as we were finalizing Dove's route.
Not just us, but also Noah. Noah is Dove's uncle, and Zeke's brother, and a direct son of Birk. And because of that last fact, our leader as well. Dove returns to the task at hand, having remembered his training and found his way to the clearing. There he sees his first sign of life, the first sign the waters may have subsided, that Birk's prophecy was indeed accurate. From there Dove finds the highway, seeing the cars and the people inside them. Dove takes this as a sign that the waters haven't fully receded, as foretold, and returns to the Ark.
Thank you, sis. Very well summarized. Thank you all for joining us, and be sure to like and subscribe.
We don't want you missing future episodes. Next week we have the Book of Omega Protocol, giving us a glimpse of our founding fathers in the very early planning stages of the Ark. Till then.